Cat People is a 1942 horror film produced by Val Luton for RKO and is my recommendation this week as a Halloween classic. The film is produced on a very low budget, which you'll be able to tell by watching it. Val Luton brought together the cast and crew in order to develop a story around just the name given to him by the studio, Cat People. And you'll be able to see that there's not a whole lot of depth to the plot. What we do have is symbolism. So if you love Freud, low-budget horror, and cats, this is definitely the movie for you. The story is about a woman named Irena who has come from Serbia to New York City, and we see her at the beginning of the film in the Central Park Zoo sketching a panther to whom she seems strangely drawn. She meets an architect named Oliver, and they spend a kind of mystical period in her apartment in which it sort of gets dark and we don't really know how much time has passed. And it's sort of hard to tell whether that's intentional on the part of the filmmaker or kind of an accident of editing. But at any rate, she beguiles Oliver and he falls in love with her and the two get married. Throughout the movie, however, Irena is haunted by the idea of sex. She feels fearful of it. She doesn't think that it's possible. And the reason for that is because in her village, in her past, she is told that if she were to express passion for a man, she would turn into a cat and devour him. And because she supposedly loves Oliver, this is what she fears. Unfortunately for Irena, and possibly for Oliver as well, he works with a woman at the office named Alice who is extremely boring and nonetheless harbors a love interest for Oliver. And in Irena's indecision, in her moment of despair, where she's seeing a therapist for her problem, Oliver and Alice fall in love, although it's rather hard to tell with the acting that they do in this film, but that's what supposedly happens, which enrages Irena, and the plot unfolds from there. Irena is played by Simone Simon, who is a French actress, and the director of the movie is French as well, Jacques Tourneur. He's famous for these kind of low-budget B-horror, film noirish kind of pictures. He also shot I Walk with a Zombie, Leopard Man, and his most famous film is the film noir Out of the Past with Robert Mitchum. This film is interesting, even though I've just been making fun of it a little bit. It's such a blast of a movie. But it's interesting for a few reasons. One of which is that it's a great film to read along with Todorov, who was a structuralist literary critic, with his idea of the fantastic. So for Todorov, the fantastic is a genre that hesitates. It hesitates between explanations of the uncanny on the one hand and the marvelous on the other. An uncanny explanation for the series of events would be something that's possible but rather unlikely. In other words, the ending of every episode of Scooby-Doo, in which the villain is exposed as actually just a bad guy who wants money. Whereas the marvelous explanation is the supernatural explanation for events. And films that belong to the genre of the fantastic tend to hesitate between these two explanations for as long as possible, and ideally until the end of the picture. So a very clear novel that you probably know that does this is Turn of the Screw, the Henry James novel, in which one explanation for the story of the governess who believes there to be ghosts in the mansion haunting the children and turning them into some kind of evil creatures because of the bad moral past of these ghosts who were once servants. One explanation would be the ghosts are real and the governess really can see them, and one of the ghosts murders the boy at the end of the book. But another explanation, one that would be uncanny, would be that the governess is actually has unrequited passion for a man, and that's unfulfilled, and so she herself, because of that female hysteria, engages in all the activities and is responsible for the death of the boy. And we can never really be quite sure. There's always an argument about these texts that belong to the fantastic. The same is sort of true of Cat People. We see that Tourneur does make a decision near the end of the movie about the explanation, and yet there's always some kind of hesitation. And I think that this hesitation is able to exist, that is, whether Irena is actually going to become a panther and fulfill the past of her ancestors in Serbia, or whether she's just, suffering from hysteria and repression. The reason this hesitation exists is because of how the movie is shot. So Tourneur gives us a lot of shadows. The film is full of shadows. It's full of quick cutting that doesn't allow us to see exactly what has happened. It's full of cat statues all over the place, and other kind of cat sounds and references to cats. And as we see these unfold, we begin to see the vision of New York City that Irena sees. And we wonder, is she really seeing something true? Are we seeing something true? Or are we just seeing the torment of her psyche as she goes through this experience, unable to fulfill her love for Oliver? So it's really in the setting and the shooting and the shadows of the film that all unfolds. Another thing to look and listen for is the music. The score is in part based on a little tune that Simone Simon would hum around the set. So that's kind of interesting and adds to the idea that what we're seeing is Irena's vision of the situation and of New York City. And another famous thing about this movie is called the Luton Bus. So there's a moment where there's a jump scare where Alice, the character played by Jane Randolph, is walking down the street and she believes that she is being followed by the panther form of Irena. And at that moment, we hear a very loud jump scare noise, and it turns out to be the bus's air brakes. And so the Luton Bus became a term for this kind of jump scare that was used in a lot of the pictures that Luton produced for RKO. He was known for this kind of thing. This is unfortunately also what gave the film something of a bad reputation among critics who saw it as kind of cheap and schlocky. It didn't have great reviews, although some people did really enjoy it at the time. Since then, this film has become in high regard because it was copied so much. A lot of the techniques that are used within it we see very often in horror films later in the 40s and even still today. So there's also another fun story offset. The two actresses didn't seem to like each other very much, particularly Simone Simon. She was very hard to work with. She used to spread all kinds of rumors about her origins to make herself seem much more interesting than she really was. And reportedly, she would taunt Randolph and at one point poured coffee on her wardrobe. So unfortunately, neither actress really became famous enough for this to be a Betty Joan scenario, but I like having it in the background of my mind as I'm watching this movie. If you like cat people, you could also continue your journey with Curse of the Cat People, the sequel that came out a couple of years later and was directed by Robert Wise. Yes, for real, his very first movie that he directed. And that movie is about what happens when Oliver and Alice have a daughter who then becomes haunted by Simone Simon. So it's kind of fun, although not as good as Cat People. You could also watch the remake of Cat People, the Paul Schrader film from 1982. That's definitely not as good as the original. So I hope that you will watch Cat People. I hope you'll have a great time watching Cat People. It's a blast. It's funny. It's really excellent in terms of the idea of film noir, movie making, and symbolism, and Freudian explanations for things. And it also, I always think this is true. There's something about movies that are made on very low budgets that reveal some deep truths about us as people. And honestly, I think this is one of those movies. This is a movie that reveals what we expect of women. So a lot of times this is true of horror movies in general, but in this movie, we're seeing that Irena, she is kind of given a choice, and so are we as viewers. Are we really meant to believe, are we buying the film's proposition that Irena is a dangerous sexual predator panther, which is what in film noir we're often told that women are with the character of the femme fatale? Or might we take a different view of this movie? Is there something else that Irena might really want other than boring Oliver? And if so, is there some kind of explanation that we might find outside of the confines of the film for what it is she may want? What do we do with the competition between Irene, who can't fit into her persona as a new American, and Alice, the all-authentic American girl, who's also a working girl in 1942? So that conflict is kind of interesting as well. So thinking about what the film, as a low-budget RKO movie, might say about American culture in the 1940s would be a pretty interesting endeavor. I hope you'll join Andrew and me to talk about it on Monday night. Thanks a lot.